You know, guys, some things are just meant to go together, like country music and old Ford pickup trucks.
That's right, and some things are meant to be preserved, like Clint Black's legendary 1960 F100 that we've got right here from his music video for Killin' Time.
Follow along with us on our journey as we resurrect this flooded out Ford and get it back on the road for the first time in 30 years.
You're watching PowerNation.
You know, here on Music City Trucks, we've done a lot of really cool projects, but I don't think any of them are quite as cool as what we got behind this door.
That's right, behind door number 6 here is not only a piece of automotive history, but it truly encapsulates the name on our shirt. Get rolling. This hidden gem is a 1960 Ford F100. Nothing cooler than an old Ford pickup, am I right?
Nope.
This particular F100 belongs to legendary country music superstar Clint Black. And if you're a fan of Clint, you've definitely seen this old Ford before. Its timeless design features a classic rounded cab with subtle stylish lines, tying into that iconic grille.
Lots of both. Well,
Got enough lead in my pencil. I'd say that wasn't a pain in the butt.
a little more. With this truck sitting in storage for over 25 years, driving it onto the trailer wasn't an option. Man, the springs in this seat feel like the ones in that mattress at your grandma's house that every family member has slept in since the 80s. Oh man, that was a little harder than I thought it would be.
Definitely harder than it needed to be. You know the story on this old truck?
The story of this truck is it was found for me to use in my first music video, A Better Man. So I drove it in the video, I used it in the second video, Killin' Time, and then I hit the road forever and ever and ever. You know, 20 years go by, I realized I need to do something with it.
So Clint had us haul his beloved 1964 pickup into the shop to see what we could do to get it up and running for his tour. It has an original inline 6 that doesn't look too shabby, but someone has definitely made some questionable engineering choices that we'll have to address. And according to Clint, this truck has had its own history of hangups.
The last time I drove it, normally out in the Houston Rodeo, I would ride in on horseback. And I thought after those 2 videos, I would drive the truck in instead. And I did. And I got halfway to the stage and it broke down. They managed to fix it. They told me it was the transmission. They fixed it with a coat hanger, just enough to get it off the field. I haven't driven it since. It's a fantastic piece of automotive history. You know, the work that Music City Trucks is going to do on it, you've got to see. You know, they love doing this stuff so much, and those guys having that same kind of passion, I just know it's going to be better than I imagined. You hear that, guys? Pressure's on.
Well, Clint, we appreciate you stopping into the shop. Here's your old 1960 Ford F100. How's it feel to look at it after all these years?
Fantastic to see it again. And the idea that I'm going to be able to drive it again is, I can't even tell you how that makes me feel.
Yeah, initial walk around the truck, it's definitely got some cosmetic damage and stuff like that. We got a flat tire on that side.
Look away from the dent.
Right, yeah. But it gives it character, right?
Yeah. If you don't see that dent, it looks almost new.
Why don't you come around the front here? We'll actually pop the hood.
Yeah.
These little hoods are heavy.
Yeah.
A little bit.
That's actually metal.
It's got a soda can for the air cleaner.
I don't remember that.
Did you put that there?
I did not put that there. I mean, you can just keep that Coke can, but chrome it out.
Chrome adds 10 horsepower, did you know that?
That's right.
One of the things we love the most about these old trucks is you've got room to actually get in and fix it. So even with something like this that's been sitting for as long as it has, we've got room to actually work around and get it back on the road for you.
We want you to be able to get back into it and fire it up and just cruise it for when you did, 30 years ago.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. Let's look at the rest of the truck. you know, something that's been sitting this long, it's got old drum brakes, so it'd probably be best if we go through new shoes, new drums, just completely do the whole thing, because the safety is going to be the #1 priority on any kind of barn find or old truck or anything that's been sitting a while. So
I like that safety part.
oh yeah, for sure. And probably some shocks. We'll go through the steering linkage, you know.
By the time we get done with this, the end goal is for you to be able to hop in whenever you feel like it, wherever you feel like driving this thing.
Hard to imagine.
How long has it been since you sat behind that steering wheel?
It's been 30 years or more.
30 years.
Yeah.
Well, what do you say we get you back in this thing?
Yes, I'd like to sit in there. The door still opens. Oh,
Wonder if that coat hanger's still hanging out down there.
That'd be cool if it was.
yeah, I want a picture of that.
Yeah, I bet you've got a lot of good memories sitting in that driver's seat, don't you?
Yep, I'm remembering now that it doesn't have a radio.
Yeah.
And then we'll get in and make sure all those gauges are working too. That way you know you don't have anything to worry about once you get it back on the road.
A law-abiding man like you doesn't need a working speedometer anyway, is that right?
No, I know what 90 looks like.
We know you're a busy man and you want to get going on your tour, but next time you see this thing, I think you're going to be pretty happy with it.
Next time you sit in that seat, you'll be driving it down the road.
Well, in the meantime, I'm leaving here a better man.
Never gets old. Up next, we stopped killing time and plucked the heart from this old Ford. Woohoo! Well, guys, it's an honor and a privilege that Mr. Clint Black entrusted us to get his old 1960 Ford F100 back on the road. Now, during initial inspection, we went through everything, including the brakes, suspension, fuel, and cooling systems. However, we did run into one more serious issue that we did not anticipate.
Now, anytime you're dealing with a truck that's been sitting for a long time like this one, the biggest question is always going to be, will it run? Now, before you try and run it, there's a few things you got to check. Fluids, make sure all the parts are there, and make sure it actually turns over. And that is where we ran into our issue, because this should really be moving right now, especially with a breaker bar this big on it. So our first step is going to have to be to yank this out of here and see if it can even be rebuilt.
Man, it reminds me when I was working in a restoration shop, we actually did a 1960 Ford F100, and we actually ended up nicknaming that thing Murphy, after Murphy's Law. Whatever could go wrong, went wrong.
Oh, now that we got things moving, there's a hole in the radiator.
Wouldn't have it any other way.
I don't think a radiator hose is supposed to sound like that.
Ooh, smells good. That is a genuine FOMO-Co part right there, my friend. Now, this old Ford pickup is kind of an odd duck, and parts and hardware are a little hard to come by, so be sure when you're tackling a project like this, tag and bag everything. These old Ford trucks rust out in the weirdest spots, don't they?
Yeah, at least with Chevys, you know exactly where they're going to rust every single time.
Sometimes these little screws get pretty rusty. Shock them by giving a couple taps like that. They break free. Well, so far, almost every nut, bolt, and screw has given us a little bit of fits. This thing's definitely rustier than we anticipated, but we're still making great progress. I got a couple more things to loosen up here in the front, while Eric tackles a few things in the back.
And the first thing we're going to be doing back here is getting this drive shaft disconnected from our rear axle. As you can see, this thing's been leaking for who knows how long. But in this case, it's probably actually going to help us a little bit because all that leakage is going to make sure that these didn't rust over and get seized up. Sounds like you're having a ton of fun up there.
Yeah, want to switch me?
I think I'm all right. All right. That looked like water.
That's not good.
Yeah, that's not supposed to be in there.
Yeah, that's not a good sign if there's that much moisture coming out of the tail shaft.
I'm gonna go grab a drain so we can pop that drain plug and see what the rest of it looks like.
Just out of our morbid curiosity, if nothing else.
I can smell it already. Let's see, that should be.
Rusty, watery, gross gear oil. That is straight water right there.
That's bad.
Add that to the list.
All right, should be the last one. All right, you got it?
Yes, Yes, sir.
All right. Finally.
With everything out of the way, we're finally ready to pluck this thing out of here. Now, the reason why we went this route is because we are pulling the engine and transmission out as one unit. And to get all of that up and over that tall core support, well, that was gonna be a pain. This is gonna be much easier. Come on down.
All right.
Let's try it.
Give it a shot. See what happens.
Woohoo!
That's gonna lean quite a bit. I think we should maybe get a chain or something we can run up just to support this side.
Yeah.
Now, probably gonna need a longer bolt here and a washer. Bolt through that bottom link. Right thread?
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right.
Woohoo!
There we go. It works. Ooh. A little bit drippy. Ooh, that's it's coming out of the dipstick too.
Water in the crankcase, I'm gonna say.
There we go. That'll do her. Oh boy. Well, you know what we gotta do now? We gotta crack this thing open and see what's going on.
Nothing else. Out of our morbid curiosity. I wonder if this thing was in a flood or something.
Coming up, we get our hands on something that's old, new, borrowed, and blue. So with everything we found inside that engine and all the water that came out of this transmission, it's pretty safe to say we're gonna have to bust this thing open and see what's going on in there. Now, this is based on these numbers here on the top. It is a Borg-Warner T85 that Ford used from 1953 to 1962. Now, it's not anything special. It's not gonna make your truck any faster, but it is a good, reliable transmission if you're not putting a lot of power to the rear wheels. Now, as you can see, our third and reverse linkage is still perfectly fine, but the first and second, it's not going anywhere. Now, our input shaft still spins good, so I think we'll be able to rebuild this, but the only way to find out is to get it torn apart. That's the first step. We gotta get this clutch shift fork popped out. That actually came out really easy. Now, something I thought was really interesting about this particular truck is that it had a factory-equipped hydraulic clutch, which I've never seen in a truck this old. I think that's pretty cool. Slide that off there. While you're tearing these apart, be on the lookout for anything broken, showing any signs of excess wear, and definitely any rust, which if we're gonna find anything inside of this, it's probably gonna be rust. You do wanna try and be careful, make sure you don't break anything, and especially if you're dealing with something this old, you won't find replacements. I know this thing's been in storage for quite a while, but all this, all over the engine and the transmission, everything else, really makes you wonder what this truck did before Clint got it. And that right there is exactly what we expected to find. So let's get these guts pulled out and see just how bad it is. There we go. It's a good release. Whoa. Definitely not as bad as it could be. I think it's pretty safe to say that we could definitely rebuild this, but that's gonna require finding some parts, so I'm gonna go take a look.
Well, obviously, that old engine that we pulled out of Clint Black's 1964 F100 has kicked the bucket. And yeah, it technically could be saved with some serious machine work, but in the spirit of saving ourselves some time and some coin, we visited a friend up in Waverly, Tennessee, and he had this one sitting in his boneyard. Now, this particular model actually came out of a 63 or 64 F100, which they are pretty much the same except for the position of the thermostat, timing cover, and motor mounts, among a couple other things. But the most important part is that it does spin freely. However, it's a little bit ugly on the outside, so I'm gonna get to work tearing off all these accessories and we'll start prepping it for some paint. Now the first thing I'm zipping off is this exhaust manifold, which is also the intake manifold. Now when you're taking this off, you want to make sure that you keep all your bolts in order because they do have different sizes and lengths, and it does matter when you go put it back together. If I was exposed to this much heat and elements for the past 60 years, I'd be pretty crusty too. I'm gonna go ahead and mask all these off. So I'm gonna be flinging some debris here. I'm gonna start using a wire wheel to clean all this gunk off. Better be safe than sorry, I guess. Knuckle buster, gotta love it. Now, usually these just have a thick gasket on them, but it's like somebody used some of this gasket sealant or gasket maker to use in place of the old school gasket because it's missing half of it. Oof, so the water pump's a little crusty. Hopefully we can get another one. Now earlier I mentioned the motor mounts. On Clint's old truck, it has like 2 motor mounts that kind of sit on both sides and come down at a diagonal. But on these later model ones, the front motor mounts actually mount to like a front cross member. And actually, you guys remember that old flatbed that the Music City trucks built a little while back? That's kind of the same setup. But swapping these out, not that big a deal. At this point, I'm not necessarily trying to strip everything down underneath the paint. Just trying to get all this loose grime and grease off, just so we have a nice, smooth platform for when we go down to lay down some paint. Up next, we mask up for prime time, start feeling blue. Well, after a few hours of some elbow grease, we're just about ready to lay some color on our inline 6 here. But before we do that, we need to tape off all of our ports. And for you guys doing this at home, got a little masking trick for you. Now, most of these openings, they have these little sharp edges, and you can use those to your advantage. Basically, all you're gonna do is spread your masking tape all the way across. And as you set it down, you wanna push firmly as much as you can. And then here's where the trick comes in. Take your little rubber mallet, you're just gonna go gently all around those little sharp edges. And as I'm doing this, it's just nice little taps, not trying to necessarily kill it. What it does is gives you an imprint on your masking tape, and then that will provide a little bit of a roadmap to where you need to cut with your razor blade. Last step, we're gonna clean everything with wax and grease remover, and we're ready for some primer. Feel like I'm mixing this in a big old witch's cauldron. This black epoxy primer is ideal for our first coat because it's sturdy, neutralizes rust, and has a high heat threshold. The color we chose to lay down is Ford Corporate Blue, courtesy of our pals at POR 15. I know Clint is a big fan of black, but black and blue have been known to go together a time or two.
While Joel was getting our engine cleaned up and painted, I went ahead and took some of the smaller parts and got them refurbished. Things like brackets, manifolds, and some other little stuff.
Yeah, because some of this stuff is really hard to come by, so we've got a good mixture of old parts and new parts, but for everything we got on the table, I think it's gonna look pretty sweet on that old engine. Something oddly satisfying about this kind of work, isn't there?
Oh yeah, simple, easy. This thing's gonna look great when we get done.
One thing I do love about these old trucks, they are simple.
Yeah, I don't think it gets much more simple than a base model F100.
You know what's crazy about the Titanic?
What's that?
After all these years, the swimming pool is still full of water. Fun fact. R.I.P. soda can.
Today, we made a lot of progress. It's a little tight, but we're good. We found an old Ford F100 that was lost in yesterday, so we swapped out a few parts to put an end to its sorrow. Rust sickles.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we turned the page on its flooded out, locked up motor,
Oh, wow.
and instead of chasing our blues away, we painted it Ford's corporate color to get Clint Black one step closer to taking home the truck he's known.
Now, don't think we forgot about this old boat anchor that actually came out of the truck.
Oh.
Whew. We did some pretty shocking stuff to get it freed up that you can check out on our website.
That's not a chocolate milkshake.
But for now, we'll see you truckers next time.
We've got Clint Black's 1964 F100 back in the shop, and we're tearing it apart from stem to stern. We replaced the entire suspension system.
And if you're into old trucks with rust, crust, and stubborn nuts, stick around. Sorry. Welcome to Music City Trucks. Today, we're going down under.
That's right, we got Clint Black's 1964 F100 up in the air to address a bunch of suspension and steering components issues, along with brakes, wheels, and tires to ensure that this thing's first trip back on the road is not its last.
And the first step to doing all that is gonna be to get all these old parts out of the way. We found this Fubard F100 right in the heart of Music City, USA. And she was in desperate need of attention. Look, we need to give this thing a deep creek bath the second we roll it in. Ugh.
Turns out she had taken a pretty serious bath already. That is straight water right there.
That's bad. All right, probably start bringing it forward.
Ooh. Oh my God.
So, with all the water damage we found, we had to go to plan B and snag another 223 inline 6 that we painted Ford blue.
Now we're on to tearing out all the old junk from this truck, and hopefully we won't be shocked with any more surprises. There's plenty of obvious problems here in the rear of this truck, but there's a couple of things that are jumping out to me a little bit more than the rest, and that is these shocks right here, because I should not be able to do that. Now, these studs right here are supposed to be welded onto these brackets so that the shocks mount to the axle. Now, I don't know if somebody fixed it at some point and the repair failed, or if they broke and never got fixed, but that is not right. Whew. Easy. You can hit the end of your U-bolts, but I try to avoid it just to keep from damaging threads.
But if the U-bolts are rusted out, they can be a safety hazard. So you might need to play a game of good old whack-a-jole.
Yep, down, down, down.
Wait a minute, if you're here and I'm here, who's running the lift?
Jinkies. Well, I know we're replacing pretty much everything on the suspension, but if there's one thing we can reuse, I think it's gonna be this rear axle.
Yeah, it's actually not in too bad a shape. It's not rusted through, but it's got a lot of nasty creek bed water almost looks like.
It's got plenty of grime on there that definitely needs to come off. So I think we'll soak it down in some degreaser and give it a quick pressure wash. That'll take care of it.
Yeah, fresh coat of paint afterwards too.
Oh yeah.
Cool. All right, buddy, do you need a hand with this?
No, I got it. It's a little cold out here, so it should be quick.
Exactly why I'm going inside. Good luck.
With how crusty this rear axle is, it's kind of hard to tell how much degreaser we're gonna need. But as long as you make sure to cover every crack and crevice, hitting it with some high pressure H2O should have you good to go. Now, if you don't have access to a pressure washer, you can just use a simple scrub brush and a regular garden hose, but it's gonna take a little bit more time and elbow grease on your part. You don't have the luxury of owning a forklift, just leave it on the wheels and tires, roll it outside, and stick it up on some jack stands. Well, I can only feel 2 of my fingers, so I'm gonna give wintertime pressure washing a 2 out of 10. Let's get this inside.
Coming up, we rip apart our rear axle and give Clint Black a rundown. Well, after a quick pressure wash, we got the rear axle out of Clint Black's 1964 F100 looking a whole lot better. Yeah, she's still a little crusty around the edges, but nothing a wire wheel can't fix. Now, when it comes to aftermarket solutions on these old trucks, you could actually get an independent front suspension, disc brake conversion, 4-link. Heck, you could even get a brand new 9-inch rear axle if you wanted to. However, we received explicit instructions from Clint that he wants this thing to run and drive just like it did 30 years ago so that he could reminisce on old memories. First step in that process, get all this old junk off of here. Eric, cut off wheel.
I don't know what these U-bolts are doing on this axle, but we definitely don't need them.
Ooh, jeez Louise.
I really hope your side's not as bad as mine.
I know mine can't be any worse. Fixed it.
Get this yoke off of here. Is that a hair? Who's putting a hair inside the diff?
Bring the waiter over, tell him to take it back. Hey, Clint.
Hey, Joel, how you doing?
I'm doing good, sir. How are you? You're looking well.
Well, I'm feeling pretty well. I'm excited to see what you've been doing.
Yeah, well, let me show you some of the carnage real quick, and we'll give you a quick update here. This is your rear axle right here.
So that's not my new barbecue pit.
No,
Okay.
you could use it as one, but we like to get it back into your truck. The worst of it was on the outside. There's a bunch of corrosion. That's pretty standard on a 60-year-old truck. We're gonna go ahead and rebuild everything. So your rear axle is gonna look brand spanking new before it goes back into the truck.
So no fresh rust for me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we can keep it on there if you want to keep that patina look, but I think you'll like a nice, fresh black paint job on it.
Yeah, it's not that kind of antique, I don't think.
Yeah. I'll bring you over here to your suspension now. So these are your front and rear leaf springs, and of course your shocks. Par for the course for a 60-year-old truck. I want to show you this shock real quick though. You see how badly bent up and dented that thing is?
That's not your normal wear and tear, right? Is it?
No, almost looks like something bounced up into your undercarriage.
No, I don't think that was me who did that.
But not to worry. For right now, I'm gonna toss you over to Eric, and he's gonna show you what else we got going on with your truck.
Hey there.
Hey, Clint, how's it going?
How you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. We're here underneath of it, so I'm gonna show you around a little bit. Now, as you can see, it is mostly gone. There's almost nothing left under here. So underneath that plywood, that's daylight coming through your bed floor there. And that actually looks like it might be the original wood that was in this bed. The frame itself, very crusty. There's no rust holes in it though. For the most part, it's actually still good solid metal. So what we're gonna do there is strip all of that and get it recoated. Then we come to this big old hole right here, and that is where your engine should be. When the truck first came in, we tried to get it to turn over, but that old engine would not budge. We pulled the engine and the transmission out, and both of them were full of water. And you know anything about that?
Well, there have been some floods in Houston. Could have been one of those.
Well, we got it all tore apart, and it's not pretty. As you can see, we've got just the bare engine block here. We've got no pistons left in it. It looks halfway decent, but there was no way we were gonna get this thing ready by the time you needed the truck for the tour. So we went ahead and we found a replacement for it that we think might serve you a little bit better.
So this is a 223 inline 6 that came out of another 63 Ford F100, and it was pretty much complete and it turned over and everything. So we pulled all the accessories off of it. You've got a brand new carburetor. We went through and rebuilt the manifold, gave it a nice fresh Ford corporate blue paint job, new distributor, new ignition wiring. You just got a little bit of everything in here. So
We couldn't stick with the Coca-Cola air filter. Is that what I'm seeing there?
But yeah, we think this will serve you a little bit better than that old boat anchor sitting on the
Yeah.
crane over there.
Man, that's a beautiful thing right there. Yeah, the bad news turned out to be pretty good news.
yeah, it turned out to not be that big a deal anyway. We found you a new engine. We were able to clean this one up, and I think it's gonna look pretty sharp underneath the hood of your old truck up there.
Yeah, I mean, it looks good just sitting where it is.
But next time you see this truck, you'll actually be able to get in and drive it.
My face hurts from smiling. This is fantastic.
It's probably gonna feel good to sit behind that driver's seat after all these years.
I'm excited. Thanks for the tour.
Yeah, no problem.
Absolutely.
Back to work.
Back to the truck that keeps on giving.
Up next, we get our bearings and differentiate our refurbed rear back into gear.
After some sweat from our brow and a few coats of paint, the rear axle assembly on our old Ford has definitely received quite a facelift. Now, this particular housing is actually a first gen of the coveted Ford 9-inch, which is one of the most popular and sought after assemblies on the market today. This rear axle has been a pillar of the hot rodding and off-roading communities since their introduction in 1957. They have a strong ring and pinion configuration, durable bearings, stout bolt-in axles, and their future growth potential is simply unparalleled. You could easily build one of these to handle up to 1,000 horsepower plus. Another favorable perk of the Ford 9-inch is their dropout bolt-in third member assembly, and it makes it super easy to swap out your gear ratios there at the track. You got a lot of options there as well, ranging from a 3-to-1 to 5-to-1, and a gear set for every ratio change, and that is what we're going to tear into next. Upon initial inspection of our ring gear, we found that it wasn't in too bad a shape other than some corrosion on a few of the teeth. Now, you could technically run this, but this is one of those things where we might as well go ahead and swap it out while we're in this deep. Also, take a listen to these bearings. Now, them bad boys are about shot. Luckily, swapping all this stuff out ain't gonna be that big of a deal. First thing I like to do is mark these little adjusters just so I have a good starting point for when I go put it back together. And another thing you're gonna wanna do is mark your main caps because it does matter which side and which direction they go. Now they make these little specialty sockets for these adjusters, but if you don't have one of those, what you can do is take a hammer and a little punch and just get it started, and then you can take like a set of snap ring pliers and spin them from there. So this is just a little specialty tool that you can use to pop off your bearings. Just kind of seats right underneath the bearing. So you just want to just snug enough to where it's gonna butt up against it, and then you can push a press right through the shaft and it'll pop the bearing off. Up to the press we go. All right, got our old bearings popped off and the new ones pressed on. And I also went ahead and pulled off our old ring gear, so now we're ready to put the new one on. So your rebuild kits are usually gonna come with a little tube of thread locker. And this is for your bolts from your ring gear to your carrier. So this next step is kind of a slow and tedious process, but it's really important that you take your time here because you want to use the bolts to reseat your ring gear. So let's go nice and easy in a star pattern until it's fully seated, and we'll torque our bolts down. Torque spec on these is 110 foot-pounds, but we'll start out at 90 and work our way up. Well, we got our third member completely reassembled with a brand new ring gear as well as new bearings. Take a listen to this. Much better, right? Now, I also went through and completely rebuilt our pinion support with, again, all new bearings, new races, a new O-ring seal, as well as new yoke seal. Now, the next thing to do is to measure rotational drag, meaning the amount of drag between your yoke and your pinion using an inch-pound torque wrench. Now, on the inside of this pinion support is what is called a crush sleeve, and it sits between both bearings. And the more you press your pinion into your yoke, the more it expands, creating more drag. Now you want about 18 to 26 inch-pounds of rotational drag, and we are about 22 to 24 right there. You want to check it both ways. Yep, 18. Looks like 22 to 24 going the other way. Now before we bolt in our pinion support, we have to install one or possibly more of these depth shims. You have to put them in between the pinion support and your case. Now these dictate the distance between your pinion and your ring gear, and it's super important to have your gear pattern correct, otherwise you could start breaking off or loosening up the teeth. Now the best way to measure which one you need is to take your original one, if you still have it, and measure its thickness. So the original one was 0.012, this one's 0.013, let's just start there. So both the shim and the pinion support only go on one way on these 9 inches. Make sure you got everything lined up. Now this is a new O-ring, so some light tapping may be required. Well, we got it seated deep enough to where we can get a bolt in. So just like we did on the ring gear, we use the bolts to completely cinch it down. We will cinch this all the way down until it's fully seated and torque them down from there. With our third member and pinion support assembly finally back together, it's time to measure our backlash. Now what is backlash? Well, it's the amount of play between your ring gear and your pinion. Let's see where we're at. Now when you're checking this, you want your dial gauge sitting right on top of the drive side of your ring gear, or the sharp side. So we're zeroed right now. We'll check our play. Right now we're at about 13 thousandths, so we need to tighten it up just a little bit. Now also usually included with your rebuild kit is a little tube of yellow or sometimes white paint. What you do is you paint it on your ring gear and then you make a few revolutions on your pinion and see where you're making contact. All right, from the looks of it, we are making contact right in the middle of the ring gear, which is what you want. Now, if you ever have any kind of contact on the inside edge or the toe of your ring gear, that means you need to add shims because you're too deep. But if the contact pattern is towards the outer edge, which is the heel, that means you need to take shims out because you're too shallow. But from where we're at, everything's looking good, so we'll go ahead and torque down our main caps and install our retainers. Put this thing back in there. Good thing I don't make these heavy. Watch your fingers. Well, now all that's left to do is for me and Eric to put this rear axle back together, and we're ready to put on some brakes. Don't worry, we're painting the differential.
I think it looks good.
Patina, baby. Coming up, we break on through, spruce up our wheels, one piece at a time.
While Joel was getting our rear axle taken care of, I was busy getting all of our front axle components refinished. Clint wants this truck to perform just like he remembers, so we're reusing OE components. Now our first step here with everything already painted is going to be to replace our grease fittings with new ones. Now I left these old fittings in because I knew we were going to be replacing them. The paint here makes it a little bit of a tighter fit, but that's actually going to help us because this will hold it in place better before it's bolted in. The axle is upside down right now, so we want to make sure that these are oriented correctly. Okay, see? Soft mallet. All right, so next we're going to be getting our brackets put on for our steering components, but I got a little bit of paint on these bolts, so it's probably going to be a little stiff to put them in. Easy way would be to use one of these little soft mallets and tap them in so you don't damage the finish, but what if you don't have one? Well, say you've got a regular hammer and some tape and a rag, you can make a soft hammer. What I like to do, if I ever need to, take the rag and just double it over as many times as you can, then wrap it around the head of your hammer, take some tape, whatever tape you have on hand will work, because all it has to do is hold that rag on there. And as long as the tape reaches itself, it'll hold that on there just fine. Got our bolts loose. We'll take our freshly manufactured soft hammer. Because we're using OE parts, we decided to hop on the AutoZone Pro website, and they had just about everything we needed to get this job done right. Duralast products are designed to meet or exceed OE specifications. In our case, for the job we're doing right now, we've got their wheel bearings and seals, wheel cylinders, drums and shoes, tie rod ends, and all new brake hoses. And that's gonna cover all of our bases to get this truck back on the road driving just like Clint wants it. And we're gonna get started with the bearings and seals. Now, when you're doing something like this, using OE components and going for any type of restoration, whether it's just getting something back on the road or doing a full-on restoration where it's gonna be pristine, it's always nice to find parts that are stamped with the manufacturer's label. But in this case, these wheel seals having that stamp means they've probably never been changed, and that's definitely not the place you wanna see them. Look at that. That grease is probably twice my age. Whew. Oh yeah. With our new races pressed in, it's time to put in the new Duralast wheel bearings and seals. Now, installing new seals is pretty easy as long as you're careful about it. I like to use a block of wood to hit the entire surface at the same time to make sure it's going in evenly. Now, you're just looking for it to be flush all the way across. To get these hubs put on, that means we gotta put in the outer bearing, and there's no way to do that with tools, so I'm actually gonna put gloves on because I hate getting grease all over my hands. Clean up all the excess. With the new bearings in and the hubs back on the spindles, it's time to seat the bearings and get the caps put on. You want to spin your hub while tightening the nut. It'll get a little bit stiff. And you just want to back it off enough to where you can get your cotter pin installed and have this spinning nice and free. Smash this down the rest of the way. Beautiful. Now we'll get the other side done, and it's time to put the brakes on.
Today, we got a lot closer towards getting Clint Black's old F100 back out on the road. I feel like one of those ice sculpture guys. We refurbished our classic Ford 9-inch rear axle, stripping off all the grit and grime left behind by Father Time. Then, we hit it with a few coats of paint, along with a fresh rebuild to get this thing looking brand spanking new. Next, we ditched the torn tires and spruced up the original wheels with a quick stop off at the beach before hitting them with some black paint. Now, all that's left is the rest of the truck. With that front axle completely rebuilt, this old truck's gonna ride and stop just like a dream. Now obviously, we still got a whole lot of work to do, but with big ticket items like that Ford 9-inch completely done, man, we're well on our way. Until then, see you truckers next time.
Welcome to Music City Trucks. Today, we're getting down to the wire with Clint Black's 1960 F100, and there is still a ton of work to be done.
That's right, we've only got 2 weeks to hit our deadline and put this project to bed. And just getting the truck to the state that it's in now, it's been an adventure in itself. Only 64 more to go. Well guys, we're still chipping away at the to-do list on Clint Black's 1960 Ford F100. And the first thing we're gonna address today is this old truck bed. If you've ever tried to tackle a job like this, you know it can be a real bear. But we've got a few tips and tricks that might make it easier than you think.
And since everything else has been such a pain to get off the truck, taking the bed off is probably gonna be the hardest thing we do today. And if you think it looks bad now, wait till we get this plywood out of here. Wonder how long that's been there. No meat left on it though. Woo. That's noisy. By the time we get done with this, we should have enough wood for a nice little fire.
Just wait till we get it out to start the fire, if you don't mind.
I gotta get the wood out of here before I can do that. Electrical tape and zip ties. Pretty much all that held this truck together.
Electrical tape and zip ties built America, buddy. Well, we got all that old crusty wood cut out, now we can take a step back and just kind of analyze the situation. And overall, this bed's not in too bad a shape other than some corrosion on the front part here, which I've already taken a liberty of building a patch panel with some 16 gauge sheet metal. We'll cut this out, weld this one in, and then we're ready to start prepping it for some paint. When I'm doing this, I usually like to cut just below the marked template line just to give myself that perfect gap between the patch and the panel. Also, if you can, cut about an inch above the corrosion to prevent any issues in the future. Just gonna tack our sheet metal into place here and go back over it and shape it with our hammer and dolly. All right, we got our patch panel tacked into place, ready for final welding. Now, before you guys go to do this, it's good to keep an air blower by your side to help control the heat so that you don't cause any warpage. All right, looks like our patch is blended in real nice. Next thing to do is get this whole thing over next door to the prep booth so we can start setting it up for some paint. As we mentioned before, Clint wants this truck to look as close to original as possible. However, there are some things that we just have to compromise on. Now, we've already had to do a little bit of rust repair here in the front, and we don't want to have to do that again. So I think the best course of action is to strip all this down to bare metal, seal it with some epoxy primer and flat hot rod black, and I think that is going to prevent the future corrosion and really make our new Bedwood kit really pop. Let's get started.
I'm wearing a respirator while I'm shearing down all this old metal and paint. Gonna keep all those old nasty antique particulates out of my lungs, which I am a fan of because I do enjoy breathing without the aid of a respirator.
All those layers of paint shining back through on that bed. Almost looks like a Picasso painting.
This flat black is pretty forgiving. Doesn't have to be as smooth as Eric's pickup lines, but it does need to be even. And we're gonna make sure to buff out any imperfections that you might see upon closer inspection.
Well, pretty much got everything ready to rock and roll. Got a few more spots to touch up, but the next thing to do is we're gonna get this over to the other paint booth, mask it off, and start prepping it for some primer. Up next, it's prime time as we get our truck ready for bed. Well guys, we got our truck bed all masked off. I cleaned it up with some wax and grease remover and a tack cloth, so we're ready for some primer. Get this stuff laid down, and we're ready for some hot rod black.
Now, I know I'm not exactly painting the Sistine Chapel here, but a steady hand, smooth motion, give you a nice even spread as you lay down your primer and your paint. Just stick to the basics, like making sure your gun is clean, handle all the drips accordingly, especially in these tight nooks and crannies around the tailgate.
Well guys, I think it's safe to say we have made a dramatic improvement on Clint's old truck bed back here. Polished out all the uglies, did some rust repair, and I think this hot rod black is gonna give it a nice deep finish. Now some of you may be wondering why we went through all that trouble to remove Mother Nature's handiwork. Well, there is a reason for it. We are replacing this bed floor in its entirety, including the hardware, bracing, and wood itself. And all that fancy new stuff inside a junky old truck bed just wouldn't look right. So, to dress this up, we're adding this Bedwood kit that we snagged at Summit Racing. It has all the holes pre-drilled along with slotted chamfers. We also opted for the Hydra satin finish, and since this is Clint Black's truck, we went with black walnut for the lumber. But before you guys just go stuffing this into your truck bed, there are a couple measurements you need to make. First things first, you want to make sure that your bed is square. 90 1/2. Ideally, you want the corners within 1/16 of an inch. That should do it. We also need to find our center point so we can evenly space out our wood and strips. So 28 1/2 is our center point. Now sometimes when you put these boards in, you gotta peel this lip up just a little bit. The best way to do that is with an adjustable wrench. Just kind of gently pull up on it, ever so slightly. All right, we got our Bedwood replacement kit kind of roughed in and it's starting to look really sharp. Next step is to go ahead and bolt in our center supports and then we can adjust our gaps from there. Eric cleaned up and sandblasted our old center supports. So if yours are in good shape, try and reuse them if you can, otherwise you have to build some new ones.
While Joel was working the wood for our bed, I was back here minding the metal so that we could freshen up this frame before we get the bed back on. And what we're gonna do that with is POR15's rust preventative coating. Now, I've already gone through, cleaned and prepped it with their solutions, so all we've got left to do is brush this on and we're ready to go. Now, you wanna be careful not to overdo it with this stuff because a little bit goes a long way. Now, you might be wondering why we're going through all the effort of painting underneath of here when it's probably never gonna be seen again, but this POR is not just paint. What it is a rust preventative coating that's not gonna chip, crack, or peel at any point, so it's gonna keep the moisture off of our frame so that we're not gonna have to worry about any rust holes popping up. That's about the biggest safety concern you could have driving an old truck. Now, the frame might look a little bit rough right now, but thankfully it is all just on the surface. And this is gonna keep it from getting any deeper than that. Less is definitely more with this stuff. It's only gonna take us about a half a quart to do this entire frame. So if you get a quart or more, you're definitely gonna have some left over for other projects down the road. The reason we didn't fully strip this frame is because POR stands for paint over rust. You're not gonna have anything to worry about once this stuff cures. Well, with all the frame coating that we can do for right now finished up, it's time to move into this interior. Now, as you can see, we've already got it mostly gutted with the seat, the gauges, and all the dash components out. Wiring's almost out of here. So all that's really left is these layers of floor mats, and more importantly, this old fuel tank. The fuel tank is one of the most important things to inspect when you buy an old car or truck because you never know what kind of sediment or rust buildup you could have in there. And that is the last thing you want running through your fuel system. Now, replacing this tank is a pretty easy choice for us because when we pulled the seat out, it hit the tank and put not one, but 2 holes in it because it is full of rust on the inside. And I think I know why. Because instead of gas, it's full of water, just like the engine and transmission. So we're gonna get this out of here and get a new one in.
Swapping out our old fuel tank labor-wise is not going to be that big of a deal. In fact, it's a fairly easy and straightforward process. However, finding an OE replacement 1957 to 60 Ford F100 fuel tank, well, that was a whole different headache in itself. Luckily, the guys at Dennis Carpenter not only had a new tank and sending unit in stock, but they had a bunch of other restoration components that we will eventually need to finish out this project. Now, some of you may be cringing at the idea of us putting the fuel tank back in the cab of the truck. Totally get it. This is basically an 18-gallon bomb cruising down the highway with you. A solution to that is to relocate the gas tank back to the rear section of the frame, which is actually what we did on our old 1964 Ford flatbed that we built last season. Relocating your fuel tank has many benefits. However, it can come with its own set of obstacles, including having to replumb your entire fuel system, not to mention welding up that giant filler neck hole there on the driver's side. And at the end of the day, Clint just wants his old truck back exactly the same way he remembers it. So for right now, we're gonna get our OE style tank slapped in there and get this thing one step closer and get back on the road.
Coming up, our flooded out Ford gets a shocking upgrade. Well, with the filler neck installed, all that's left to finish up this fuel tank is to get our sending unit wire hooked up. But with the fact that the truck has been flooded and this wire is just really old in the first place, it's probably a good idea to replace it. We know that there's been water in here and that can lead to shorts, blown fuses, and it's also a fire hazard. So replacing your wiring on something this old, especially if there's water damage, is one of the best ideas that you could have. Instead of buying a whole bunch of wire, connectors, and other supplies and spending all the time to build this harness out from scratch, we went and found this American Auto Wire Classic Update Series wiring kit at Summit Racing. Now, this is a complete kit that comes with everything you need to rewire your entire truck front to back. It also comes with its own fuse block that's gonna allow us to update to blade style fuses rather than the original glass fuses. And every single wire in this kit is labeled, so even if you're still a beginner and learning, this is gonna be the easiest, safest way to make sure you get this done right. Now, the first step to getting this installed is gonna be mounting this fuse block exactly how American Auto Wire recommends. Depending on your build, you might have some unnecessary wires in a kit like this, but make sure that you read the instructions and the labels before you start cutting them. The wiring's coming along pretty good so far, and I've got the interior mostly buttoned up, so I've moved out here to the engine bay to start getting some of this stuff run. Now, a lot of it can't be terminated until we get things like the engine and the lights actually put back onto the truck, but that's okay, because we can at least get the wires close to where they're gonna live once all that's done. Now we're gonna need to take care of these screws that we used on the inside to mount the fuse block and a couple of wiring clamps. And not only is this gonna keep you from getting your hands all cut up, but it's also gonna make it look and blend in a lot better with this fresh black paint. With all those capped off, we got one more thing we need to do before we can start looming these wires together, and that is fill in this hole right here. The best way to do that is with a grommet. But with the wires already being run, we can't slide one over, so we're gonna have to make some modifications to this to make it fit. We're gonna take a pair of cutters and make a nice, clean cut. But this hole itself is a little bit too small for that big old bundle, so we're gonna need to trim this rubber off, very carefully work our way around. With that done, we can get this put on and move on to getting the wire loom done.
When it comes to wiring up the ignition system on one of these old Fords, man, it's about as simple and easy as it gets. Pretty much everything runs along this passenger side inner fender, and I've got a battery sitting in here just for mock-up purposes so that we can measure how long we need to cut our terminals that'll run down to the solenoid switch, which will run as our primary hub for our entire ignition system. Now, this little guy has 4 terminals. The first one is where you're gonna tie in to the positive side of your battery. It's got one just like it on the other side for a hot wire to the starter. And on the front here, you can see 2 letters, S and I. The S is where you'll tie into the key hot on your ignition switch, and the I is for the positive terminal on your ignition coil. All of these components have to work in harmony in order to get your engine to fire. But once it is running, how does it maintain that electricity? Well, back in the day, these old trucks had what was called a generator. And these things were hefty and beefy, and man, they could put out some current. But they did require one thing, voltage regulator. If Clint wants to cruise down the highway with the headlights on, the radio blasting, and the windshield wipers flapping, he'll have this thing to thank. Because basically what it does is it evenly distributes 12 to 14 volts throughout the entire electrical system so that one component doesn't get overloaded or underloaded. There are some companies out there that offer alternators that look just like generators, and they're internally regulated. So for you guys at home that like that old school look but want a few more modern conveniences, might be something you look into. But no matter what route you decide to take, first things first, you're gonna need an engine. Up next, fire in the hole. It's time to see if this straight 6 will turn over. Well guys, it's finally happening. We're stabbing that inline 6 back into Clint's old truck permanently. And if things go well, we'll be test firing it by the end of the day. But first, we got a few components that we still need to install, including our flywheel, clutch assembly, bell housing. We're gonna kick things off with the good old pilot bearing. Thread locker is crucial here. Once everything is torqued to spec, you won't want those bolts to back out and cause damage to the clutch. Now I got a little flywheel holder here because you don't want this thing to spin while you're torquing these down, especially if you got your crank sitting at top dead center. And if you don't have one of these, pry bar works just as good. All right, next thing we're gonna throw on is our clutch disc. Now usually these things come with a little specialty tool that'll help center it on the pilot bearing as well as hold it in place. Now I'm gonna advise you guys, before you put this on here, go ahead and set your clutch disc on your input shaft or your transmission, just so you double check and make sure you got the same spline count. Don't ask me how I know. If the spline count doesn't match, you're in for a whole host of issues, such as the clutch not engaging, premature wear and tear, or the input shaft itself gets damaged. All very bad things. Torque spec on these is 30 foot-pounds, but it's a good idea to make sure they're all seated first before you go to that next step. All right, gonna get our mid plate set in here. You know, a lot of modern bell housings are actually made out of aluminum, but on this old Ford, it's made out of cast iron, so gotta bring in my muscle man, Eric, set this thing on here.
It's definitely a little heavier than some of the newer stuff. Oh yeah, I think you got it from there.
Thank you, sir. If you guys don't have an Eric, well, I recommend hitting the gym or get some new friends. Now, I don't know if any of you guys have seen one of these old Ford starters before, but they're kind of funky looking. Basically, they have this little Bendix drive that sits on top of the shaft, and then when the flywheel's turning over and the motor fires, it'll use centrifugal force to retract the gear back into itself. Tell you what, we've come a long ways in 60 years as far as technology goes.
I really hope this thing runs.
It's one of those ran when parked kind of deals.
All right, start going down. I'm gonna crawl underneath there and grab that tail shaft. Okay, hold up a second. Let me see if I can get these, at least one of these bolts started.
No hurry. We get paid by the hour.
All right, down a little. Okay, hold up right there. All right,
She's in.
you good up front?
Yes, sir.
Feel better once we hear it run though.
I hear you.
Today, we tore into this old F100 and had to get rid of some battered parts.
This is like household wiring for like your outlets and stuff.
Definitely does not belong on here, that's for sure.
Yeah, we dove in like a surgeon and sought out any and all components we couldn't repurpose to make Clint's truck drivable once again. Woohoo! Cleared one brace.
That's half the fun.
We installed an all-new bed with a signature Clint Black coat of eye-popping paint.
We also treated the frame for rust so that the bed and the rest of the ride should stay rust-free for years to come.
And with our all-new suspension finally installed, we're ready to kickstart the heart of this foobarred old Ford.
With our engine dropped in, we've still got a few key components that need to get hooked up before we can call it finished, like the cooling system, the belt, a few other things that we'll take care of later. But for right now, we want to test fire this thing to make sure that we got a good engine. Joel, I think it's about time we find out if this thing's any good.
Yeah, I'm nervous and also a little excited. You ready?
Yeah,
Here we go.
let's see what happens. Well, no exhaust. This thing sounds pretty rowdy.
It does, especially for a six-banger.
Yeah.
Oh, it's still got a whole lot of work to do, my friend.
Yeah, I'm gonna get some coffee. I don't know, you want some?
Actually, that sounds awesome. You know, I hear Clint makes a pretty mean cup of joe himself.
Well, today is finally the day that we show our shop nothing but the taillights as we quit killing time and get this old truck back on the road.
That's right, this thing's been through hell and high water, and we have absolutely no time left to kill. Will we make our deadline and have this thing ready for Clint's tour? Even I can't answer that. Stay tuned and find out on Music City Trucks.
Our journey kicked off with us hauling Clint Black's 1960 Ford F100 back to the shop. Needless to say, this truck needed a lot of work. All right,
rust sickles. Oh my God.
That is straight water right there.
That's bad.
Add that to the list.
Oh.
The engine had more water than the swimming pool on the Titanic. So we had to swap it out with a junkyard rescue that just needed a little love and a fresh coat of Ford blue paint.
Electrical tape and zip ties. Pretty much all that held this truck together.
Electrical tape and zip ties built America, buddy.
The worst part of this Foobarred F100 might have been that old truck bed. Just looking at it, you might as well go and get a tetanus shot. We had to completely gut it, drop in the new floor, and we replaced all the wiring.
You good up front?
Yes, sir.
Feel better once we hear it run though.
As soon as we heard that engine fire, we knew we were in the home stretch. However, that last 10% is usually what takes up 90% of your time. Our to-do list has been getting shorter, but the days have definitely been getting longer. And we still got a whole lot of stuff we need to button up before this thing goes back to Clint.
And this old girl behind me might have her face on now, but she still needs some eyes. So we went to our friends over at Holly and picked up a set of their retro bright LED headlights.
Now, these headlights aren't like other LED replacements out on the market.
These are specifically designed to look just like your original sealed beam, so you still get that old school style, but you get the convenience of modern LED headlights that are gonna provide a safer driving experience. And because these lights are LED, they are gonna last a lot longer than your standard halogens. Now, to show the difference between these new headlights and our old sealed beams, we're gonna do a little bit of side-by-side testing. Now, I've got a spare battery here and a couple of test leads. We're gonna kill the lights and show you just how much of a difference these really make. That is much better. Now, up first, we're gonna test the old light. Now, unfortunately, this is the high beam on our old headlights. It's not very bright. And don't get me wrong, I love sealed beam headlights. They look great and they work awesome, but the light output just isn't there. Now, to really see the difference, we're gonna fire up this light from Holly. Now that is a nice, bright headlight. It also has a much better beam spread, so you'll be able to see more of the road. Now for the high beam, definitely don't leave those on when someone's coming at you. Now, it's pretty clear that this is an obvious choice for an upgrade on any old car or truck, especially if you want to keep that old school look. But now that you've seen why we're using them, it's time to get them put in.
It's these little subtle changes that can really elevate your build though.
Oh yeah, and not to mention with these, it's actually gonna make it a lot easier and a lot safer to drive this thing at night. Now, while I was putting all this together, I went ahead and punched a couple of holes in the back of our headlight buckets. That way it's easier to route all this wiring. That hole's big enough, we can run the socket right through here, so we're not trying to cram a whole bunch of wire inside the bucket with the lights. You know, I think one of the best things about these Holly lights is that it really works for any kind of build.
Kind of got like, it almost looks like crystal on the front lenses. It's real sharp looking.
And grounded.
That's not in that great of a place either.
The outside prongs were a little splayed out. Man, that is a really bad spot for them.
Who put those there?
I don't know.
It's a jack wagon.
Guy's kind of All right, well, all that's left is to see how they look. Joel, hit it. Whew, look at that. Oh, man.
Up next, we're the headliners of this show, and we control the music. The next thing that we're going to be addressing is something that's kind of been bugging me ever since this truck came in here. And that would be this droopy headliner. And any of you guys at home that have ever cruised around in a decades-old vehicle, probably familiar with this problem. So what are the solutions? Well, you could buy a reproduction and replace it yourself, or you could take it to your local upholstery shop and have them fix it. Problem with both of those though is that it costs money. And in all honesty, for less than $100, a couple hours of your time, you can actually fix this yourself. I am mildly impressed at how good a shape this stainless trim is in. Hope I look this good when I'm 60 years old. Now these are kind of made out of a corrugated cardboard So you got to be really careful pulling this out so it doesn't break in the middle or break any chunks off. I'm stuck. Boy, it's a bad time for Eric to take his coffee break. Surgical precision. We got Clint's old headliner spread out across our workbench, and I was pleasantly surprised to find that everything is still in really good shape. Now the next thing to do is to slowly pull off all this old cloth. We're going to take our time here because we're going to try and preserve as much of this material as possible. Now I'm not trying to like dig in here really deep into the cardboard. I'm just letting this little scraper just glide across the surface so that it separates it. It's actually working pretty good. All right, edges are done, so we're ready to flip this thing over and get it from the other side. As far as material goes, you could go vinyl or leather, crocodile skin, whatever strikes your fancy. All right, we got all of our stray boogers kind of sucked up with the shop vac, and our surface is nice and clean. So the next thing to do is lay down our layer of fabric here. Once it's centered, we can start gluing from the center out. I got these little rubber tip clips here that's gonna hold it in place in the center. Or if you don't have these, you could actually use a clothespin. Works just as good. Now we're gonna be using a professional quality contact adhesive because it's easy to spray out of the spray gun. And it's a little bit more expensive, but you want this stuff to last. Now if you don't have a gun or an air compressor, well, run down to your local hardware store, grab you a paintbrush, use the Bob Ross technique of painting some happy little bushes. Works just as good as well. All right, gotta let that sit for about 5 or 10 minutes. Now we're gonna kind of do this in sections. So once this glue is set up, we'll go ahead and set it down and spread it, and then fold it back over, glue, spread, glue, all the way down to the end. Then we'll come back over, do this side, and by the time it's said and done, everything should be nice and tight. I got this little rolly tool here that's gonna help push out all the wrinkles as well as form the glue to the fabric. All right, next thing to do is fold all these edges over, glue them down, and then we'll clean up all this excess, call this thing done.
This thing looks good.
A lot better than what it did.
That's for sure.
It's a little tricky.
A little bit. How did you get this thing out of here by yourself?
Well, you would know if you weren't on your coffee break.
Pop it in there.
Mm-hmm. Them Ford boys on the assembly line got these on in about 2 minutes.
Good for them. I will not be doing that.
Cool. She's in, buddy.
That looks real good. It's the weirdest things in this truck that have been in good shape. One of the upgrades we decided we're gonna make on this truck is to add a radio, because we can't really give back to country music star his truck without having some way to listen to music in it. A lot of these old trucks, including this one, didn't come with radios from the factory. So we called up our buddies down at the Outlaw Garage, and he sent us this classic style radio kit along with some high quality speakers. Now, installing a radio in something that's never had one in it before, in my opinion, is actually easier than trying to add an aftermarket radio to something that had one from the factory. So we're just gonna start by resting the knobs up against the dash, get you a tape measure. We're gonna measure from the glove box, we got about 3 1/8. And this hole right here, that is also about 3 1/8. So with everything measured out, we're gonna go ahead and make a mark right under where our knobs are gonna go through. Just like that. And punch a couple of holes. Our next step is to cut the hole for the rest of the radio to go through. Now the corners are marked, we can take the faceplate the rest of the way off and use it to verify. Now we can come back with a carbide bit, clean up the corners, and do a test fit. Coming up, we pipe in more than just good music and sweeten the sound of our inline 6. I went ahead and got our radio test fitted and installed, so it's time to move on with getting our speakers put in. Now we're gonna start by taking our speaker and setting it upside down on our door panel. I wanna make sure it's situated in the center of the panel
we've got these flanges here where the screws go. We're gonna use those as measuring points to make sure that all 4 corners are even from the edges. We've got 2.5 there, and 2.5 there, we're good. All right, with our speaker centered, we're ready to start marking. So we're gonna mark all the way around the entire perimeter of this speaker. Now, thankfully, these 6x9s are a pretty big oval, so it's not too hard to finish out these markings. Now, with that completely marked out, we're gonna measure the flange width on the speaker itself so that we can make another mark around the inside where we're actually gonna cut. Now, it looks like this flange on the speaker is about a 1/2 inch all the way around. So we're gonna make a bunch of 1/2 inch deep marks inside of this original oval. We're gonna play a quick game of connect the dots, then we can get to cut. We're gonna do just like we did on the dash, punch a hole, take our body saw, and cut this out. And it doesn't have to be clamped super tight in the vise because we're not putting a whole load of pressure on it. Just needs to be able to hold it in place. And this is the back side of the panel, but it'll still give you an idea. It's gonna cover up any imperfection just fine. For now, I'm gonna get these edges cleaned up a little bit, round them out a little bit more. We'll get the panel back in the truck, drill a couple holes, get the speakers in. With the speaker mounted in the door panel, it's time to drop it in, see how it fits. The door panel's a little heavier now. I'm only gonna put a couple screws in because I will have to take this back off when I wire it up. Now, if I do say so myself, that doesn't look half bad for an install of brand new parts into an old truck. Once that's finished up and the radio is wired, we've just got a few more little things to button up, and this truck's ready to roll for the first time in 30 years.
One of the last hurdles we need to tackle on Clint's old truck before it hits the open road is the exhaust system. And for some of you guys at home, that subject matter is the bane of your existence. For others like me, well, we mildly enjoy it because it gives you a chance to show your creative side, and it can be as simple or as custom as you like. When this truck first rolled in here, it had a single 1 7/8 pipe that ran right along this frame rail, and then it kicked out right in front of the driver's side tire, which I can only assume was some sort of makeshift repair some farm boy made back in the day. Because technically, this truck would have had from the factory a pipe that came straight off the manifold down to this front cross member, make a 90 all the way, and then another 90 straight out the passenger side. And some of you might be thinking, well, that seems a little complicated. Why didn't Ford just pull off the manifold and go straight out the driver's side? There actually is a reason for it. Most standard passenger vehicles will spend 68% of their time on the road with only one occupant in the vehicle. So in a way, Ford was a little ahead of their time in limiting that exposure of exhaust fumes to the dude sitting in the driver's seat. And our plan of attack is to route Clint's exhaust system close to how it was from the factory, because quite frankly, if it was good enough for Ford, it's good enough for me. Now, as I mentioned before, this exhaust system was 1 7/8 from the factory. We're gonna go ahead and increase that to 2.5 using this universal kit that we found at Summit Racing. Bigger pipe diameter means less restriction, therefore better airflow and better performance. And I know by no stretch is this thing a powerhouse. At best, this thing's pushing about 60, 70 horsepower. But somewhere down the line, Clint gets a wild hair and decides he wants to put a power adder on this thing, like a turbo. Well, he'd have an exhaust system that supports it. Now, anytime you're doing this, there is something that I like to call the rule of thumb, which means you want at least a thumb's width gap between your exhaust system or your frame, driveline, anything like that. Routing my exhaust, just gotta make sure it's not gonna run into the axle. Looks like we got a straight shot out the back, but I think we can make that work. And sometimes when I'm looking at it aesthetically wise, I'd like for the pipe to run parallel with the frame rails. Performance wise, it's not gonna make a difference, but be a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. All that's left to do now is kind of tack everything together, and we'll do our final welding, set our hangers, and we'll have pretty much exhausted all our efforts to getting this truck done. Up next, we check all the boxes and race to a photo finish with no time left to kill.
Well, you finally finished all the work that's gonna get your old truck back on the road. But that doesn't mean that you're done. Now, just because the work's finished doesn't mean you can just go out and drive it. You need to do a pre-trip inspection, and that involves checking everything that you touched. We just finished up underneath with checking all of our brake line fittings, engine and transmission mounting bolts, and suspension components. And one thing that we like to do around here is mark all of our suspension bolts with a paint marker or something similar, so that if anything backs out on that first drive, it's easy to identify when you get back. But just because you've checked everything underneath doesn't mean you're done.
That's right, you're gonna wanna check all your fluids. Coolant, fuel, oil, brake fluid, tranny fluid, gear oil, all the good stuff. Last up, check all your electronics. Headlights, taillights, brake lights, turn signals. Oh, don't forget to try out that fancy new radio. Gotta have some tunes cranked while you're cruising around on your main voyage. All right, Eric, let's give it a shot. Headlights. Yep, brights. Oh yeah, those work. Left turn signal. Right turn signal. Perfect. I'll check the brake lights. All right, we got tail lights. Go ahead and give me some brake lights. Okay, left turn signal. Right turn signal. Cool, buddy. I think we're in business. And we're off. Like a herd of turtles. Make my door shut. Fixed it.
God, I hope that's on camera.
Been a long time coming, man.
Yeah. You know, for Clint asking us to just make this truck drive, we sure did put a lot of work into it. I think we definitely made something to be proud of.
Yeah, feels good after all those late nights of working on this old truck, and especially when you put your heart and soul into a project. Feels good to finally get it out on the road.
For just a good around town cruiser, you know, it's perfect for hitting back roads with the windows down on a nice day like this. You couldn't ask for something better.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say old Clint's gonna be pretty happy with how it turned out. Did he say where he was gonna meet us?
I think we're meeting him right out in front of the Opry.
Can't think of a better spot to meet a country music legend to give his truck back to him, you know? Probably gonna take a while to get there, going 45 miles an hour. Well, guys, we're here at the Grand Ole Opry to give Clint Black his 1964 F100 back.
That's right. With this thing finally done, it's time for him to take it back so that he can get out on the road on tour.
There he is.
The man himself.
It's the big day.
Yes, sir.
As you can tell, the outside looks pretty much the same.
It's a beast. Look at that.
By far the biggest transformation is underneath the hood. So what do you say we start there?
Let's start there.
All right.
Well, it looks the same to me. Now, that's when you have to cut to the shot of what it looked like, because it is not the same. Where'd my Coke can go?
We've got it hanging up on the wall in the studio. That's
In memoriam, the can.
yes.
So what we've got here is a slightly newer model. This is from a 1963 truck. We found this to keep it period correct. That way you still get that same experience while you're driving it.
Well, 1991, it gave its last gasp,
So it's gonna ride like an old truck, but it's gonna do it a lot better than it did before.
which was not at all.
Well, I think that about covers it under the hood. I think it's about time to show them the back.
You can see here we fixed all that rust and gave you a nice new Bedwood floor. And since you are Clint Black, we decided to go with black walnut for the wood.
I would have lost a bet on whether you guys could pull this off in time. I would have thought this is years, or at least several months of work.
Well, we've got a couple more surprises for you. If you want to hop in that cab and climb up into that driver's seat.
Ah,
Now that seat should feel nice and
feels
familiar.
just like the old days.
As you'll notice, we went ahead and refinished your dash here. All the gauges have been redone.
I just can't believe it. Looks fantastic.
On the glove box there, we went ahead and pulled the script off of your first album and painted that right on there, so you'll
Nice
never
job.
forget where this thing came from.
Oh yeah, that's excellent.
Eric did that by hand and some masking tape.
No kidding.
Yep, nice little subtle touch for you.
Yeah, completely attached to its past.
But the crown jewel, I think, of the inside is something that you've mentioned. We went ahead and put a radio back in the truck.
God, I didn't even remember we talked about that.
We've had a lot of fun working on this, and we hope it brings you just as much enjoyment.
I got to get back on the road, but not before I crank this baby up.
Yeah, just a quick 1-2 and then hold that throttle. She'll fire right up every time.
Come on, old girl. Yeah, there she is.
That's a great sound. Wish me luck.
There you go.
They grow up so fast, don't they?
Yeah. You know that was our ride back to the shop, right?
I'll call us a cab.
Good idea.